Welcome to episode 13 of the Expert Cruise Show. I'm Chris, he's Anthony, and we love cruising, and I'm pretty sure that if you're watching the show, you do too. But today we thought we'd have a bit of a journey through why you love cruising. And Anthony, I think you're one of the biggest cruise fans out there.
Well, I thought that this episode would be more like a therapy session because, you know, I have friends who, most of my friends don't get it. They just don't get it. They're like, why on earth would you want to be on like a floating toilet with 2 or 3 or 4 or 5,000 other people?
A floating toilet.
Well, somebody, I can't remember who it was that described them as that, because especially when you look at that camera in Miami and you see them in high speed all kind of moving in and out, and they do look like toilets because of the shape of them, and they're white invariably, and they do look like, you know, people getting on and off gigantic toilets. So, I mean, that's not a great way to start a video about why we love cruising, but, you know, the sentiment is there. And I'm one of these people, as I think I've said time and time again on this show, that I will happily go on any cruise. I'm really, I love talking about the nuances of them, but I am the kind of person who's just like, just get me on a ship. And I think it's hereditary. You know, my grandmother was like that, my mum's like that, I'm like that, and my kids, they're obsessed with, they've only been on one ship, but they go on it every year. And so, you know, they talk about the main dining room. I think my son calls it the fancy dining room on the Navigator of the Seas, which is so cute. So it is a kind of hereditary thing in my family. But I'm of the opinion that, and I think I may have said this before, that being on land, on a land vacation, it just seems so pedestrian. And if you were to price up what you get at sea on land, the value simply isn't there. You know, to get 3 beautiful meals in a main dining room every single day, served by fantastic waiters who you build relationships with, who get to know your drinks and your orders, and then to be able to go to the spa and, you know, lectures and to see a show in the evening. And if you don't like the show, you just leave and you go and see another show down the hall. And imagine like doing that on land in real life. You'd be spending $3,000 a day. And yet, as you know, I like to book cruises for $100 a day. So for me, it's about the pleasure that is derived not just from the cruise and being at sea, but also the value. I do love a value proposition. What about you?
Well, I mean, just to follow up on that, you're pretty much like the most skilled person that I know in finding that value proposition, because every couple of days I will switch on my phone and WhatsApp pops up and you say I've got my discount, I've got it, the cruise has been rebooked at a lower price, which is quite remarkable. Look, for me it was basically like my family back before I was born used to travel on the ocean liners, and particularly the Union Castle ships that would operate from the UK to Southern Africa. And so there was always like a family link with voyages at sea. But when I was a kid, up until I was about sort of 11 or so, we'd never been on a ship as a line voyage or even as a cruise. And we all us in my like immediate family, we went on the QE2. And all of us fell in love with the ship. And so for a number of years, it was just QE2. And it was a bit like what you were saying with your kids, but it was like one ship. And people kept saying to me, you got to like broaden your horizons. You've got to see different ships. You'll give you different experiences. And as I got older, we started to do that. That moment you get when you're at sea and the ship is by itself and you're on the deck and it's in the ocean and it's moving and it's ever so gently rocking and you just hear the water and you can see the horizon. That is like not found anywhere else, which I find very, very appealing. And if you can carve out some time to go and sit on the deck chair and just take it in and think about like time slowing down a little bit, it's very nice. I think also when you're doing a crossing particularly, or if you're doing a longer voyage. So for example, Rochelle and I did years and years ago from Australia up to Japan on the Queen Mary 2, and it was 7 days in the Pacific or on that part of the world. So it was like a crossing, but it was a Pacific crossing, I suppose. And there's just this sort of gift of time where you could have got there in 7 hours or whatever on a plane, but because you have that extra time that you can indulge in the things that you were talking about, you can take in the lectures, or in my case, present the lectures. You can go to the spa and say, I'm literally going to spend half a day in the thalassotherapy pool, and I don't mind because I've got 6 more days on this trip. And you can take in long lunches, you can take in shows in the evening, you can stay up late and sleep in the morning because you've got that time to do it. I don't mind going to a hotel or a resort. We like land-based holidays as well. We actually do really enjoy that. But I think the cruise is more than just the convenience. It's actually...
Well, it is the destination, isn't it? I mean, that's the thing. The cruise is the destination and they bring the stops to you. It's the... I say it's a bit like QVC. Quality, value, and convenience. And to kind of get that and add in what you were describing, which is the kind of romantic aspect, the romanticism of being at sea, the whole kind of love boat experience, the sitting on a deck chair and watching the sea go by. The other thing I was going to add to your description was the skies that you don't see on land.
Yeah.
You see these incredible skies. Whale watching. I mean, people pay to go whale watching. You can whale watch every day, literally, on cruises for free. So I and I'm not someone who does excursions or organised events. I don't really get involved in any of that. And I can say to my friends who say, why do you want to be on a ship with all those other people, is that you can actually carve out, if you don't want to integrate that night, you can actually carve out space, or that day. You can find deck chairs that are near nobody. You can find, if you move around the ship a little bit, become a bit of an expert, you can actually really create quite an exclusive and private vacation for yourself and your travel partner, and despite the fact that there are thousands of other people on board.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing, with that whole onboard experience is because, even when they talk about the big ships, and they're the ones that get quite a lot of the attention when it comes to so many people, but they've very cleverly designed the interiors of the, say, Oasis class or the Icon class to have these sort of distinctive neighborhoods. And I've never actually been on board myself. So look, if you're listening and you disagree with what I'm telling you, let us know in the comments. But from everyone who I know who has been on board, they say you don't actually get, for the most part, a sense of overcrowding. And they've used the way that they've architecturally designed the ship, but also some technology in terms of booking activities and shows, which might not be your cup of tea. You might not want to have to do that, which is fair enough. But they kind of limit the number of people that are going to certain areas through sort of suggestion and the way that the booking engine that they use works. So that apparently it doesn't feel like you're traveling with 6,000 other people in any one particular part of the ship. Whereas sometimes on some of the smaller ships with a lower passenger space ratio, they do sometimes feel a little bit like there's lots of people around. And of course,
if the weather's bad, especially, and you need to all be inside, then it totally can get crowded. And Celebrity Edge has felt like that for me because, we were in Alaska and it was cold, and so everyone's inside, and it did seem a little bit like a shopping mall at times. But we got the same thing with the Royal Princess when we went down to Tasmania, because we had one day of bad seas, and as I think it was spoken about in the Princess episode, they had to close the top of the ship up. And I was going to say that for me, there's a magic number, and look, cruising is so subjective, and you'll get your favorite ship, and you'll get your favorite cruise line, and you'll have your favorite cabin, and all that stuff. It's very personal. But for me, the magic number is 2,000.
Okay.
2,000 passengers and $2,000. These are my kind of limits. And it's kind of coincidental because I was watching a vlog the other day of a couple that had gone on, what ship were they on? I think they might have been on Queen Mary 2 actually, or something they were on that I'd been on recently. And they were like, we paid $5,000 for this room. And I was like, what? Like, what are you doing? To me, it's not worth $5,000 for 7 days. A 7-day voyage is $1,000 a person tops. And if you can't find a cruise for $1,000 per person, then you can't go. Like, I'm not letting you go. Stay home. But people do, especially if you're looking at Disney Cruise Line and things like that. I mean, very, very expensive. And I just haven't shown my children Disney Cruise Line on YouTube or anywhere. Like, as far as they're concerned, it doesn't exist.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
because it's just not within my price range. And so I'm not going to kind of do what some people do and put it on a credit card and worry about it later. It's just to me, it's just too expensive. And so I do look out for the deals, and I do make my itineraries or choose my itineraries based on what deals are available. And I think that's a much better way to cruise because, as I've said several times on this show, the less you pay, the lower your expectations are, you're never going to be disappointed. And so I cannot see the difference on the same ship, in the same cabin, and a 7-day voyage, why some people are paying $5,000 and other people are paying $2,000. And so I would rather just suck it up. You know, it's very important to me because I see that line of people at guest services or the purser's office, and I just think, you know, for $2,000 I have nothing to complain about.
Oh yes, yeah. You know, the other interesting thing is that I think, like with Disney, for example, or other brands that are aimed at families, sometimes there is a bit of a premium because of the family-friendly activities, particularly in holiday times, like school holidays, for example. But, you know, kids generally will enjoy a cruise holiday with their immediate family, regardless. I mean, my experience, regardless of the ship. I started on the QE2 that was not known as a family-friendly ship, but it had facilities, it had activities, the crew looked after you really well. My kids have really enjoyed their time on Cunard ships, of course, because I do so much work on board, P&O Australia, upcoming trip on Carnival. So there's like the different types. You don't have to go for the premium family cruise line. You can go for other brands. And you see children traveling with their families on all manner of different cruise voyages because of the different holiday periods that overlap. So sometimes if, you know, you're on an Australian leg and it's just gone into school time once again, the ship actually might have quite a lot of US families on board who are traveling through the US holidays or vice versa. So you can find, they can find other people to hang out with, even if it's not peak period. So
it's
sometimes you can get
with American workers, though, because American workers only get 2 weeks vacation a year, and yet their kids get like 2.5 months summer break.
Oh,
so
it's crazy combination.
Completely incompatible with going on.
Well, that's why
cruise.
summer camp's so big, isn't it? Like we just don't have that here because in our part of the world, the standard is 4 weeks annual leave accrued per year, and our big holiday. Well, and I guess any of the Southern Hemisphere countries, the big holiday is generally around Christmas because it's summertime, so it's hot, and that's when you have your big break. So quite often people will take their leave to combine with the Christmas period. You know, it makes a lot of sense. But you know the origins of that for Australia at least, and New Zealand. The reason why we have so much more
as well, I guess.
Well, you know, the interesting thing is that we ended up over here with almost historically better leave conditions because it used to take so long to get back to the UK by ship, and so many people wanted to go back to visit family. Yeah, so you would have to accrue your leave, but you got it in 4 week per year blocks. And then you would spend, 9-10 days on a ship getting back to the UK, spend a little bit of time with family, and then you'd have to budget for the trip coming back to Australia. So you needed that extra travel time because we were at the ends of the earth, you know? So,
that is great intel. You see, that's why you get paid the big bucks, Chris, because you bring intel like that to the table. But there's so many lines now, and there's so many ships, there's so many options that I often recommend to people that, you know, the standard is pretty good now. You know, obviously we know that Carnival is a little bit more kind of bargain basement. You know, it doesn't mean you're going to have a bad cruise, but it just attracts a certain clientele. Yeah. And some people don't want to have that much fun. I don't want to have that much fun. But
it depends on what you think is fun.
Exactly. So But I mean stuff like kind of deck parties and pool parties, and where there's like a lot of energy and a lot of things going on, and people taking full advantage of the drinks package.
Here's a question for you. Have you ever done a water slide?
No, I mean I've queued up with my daughter a lot to get on the water slides, but I just wouldn't go on them. Like, it just doesn't interest me.
They're so much fun, Anthony.
Yeah, I get claustrophobic, and I get worried about, all sorts of things. I get worried about getting stuck in the tube, and then I have all these kind of things of they're going to have to come up and rescue me, and how embarrassing is that going to be? They're going to have to open a hatch in the middle of the slide. So my anxieties, there's no way that I'm going to manage a water slide. But my daughter, she's just like on it. Interesting, here's a bit of trivia. The Navigator of the Seas, which is the ship that we go on the most, actually has the best and longest water slide at sea. So even though it's a 25-year-old ship, it was fully redone. What do they call it?
Refurbished.
Reimagined. I don't know. They have a word for it.
Reimagined. Okay, yeah. Okay. They had a program, didn't they, for their
That's
ships?
right. So in 2019, it kind of got I think they spent about $200 million. It was almost, they could have bought a new ship. They just totally redid it, and they added these water slides. And this is an interesting twist. Just talking about the family cruises and going on Icon class or Oasis class, is that for my money, because they do charge a premium for those newer ships. The older ships, they tend to, the price they drop. But in terms of what's on board, it's pretty much a carbon copy. So you have all of the same stuff. It's just a little smaller.
Yeah.
And on Navigator, I believe that Navigator and any of those Voyager class ships are the best value family ships out on sea. I really don't think that there's anything on Icon class that my kids anyway would get more pleasure from. And the fact that there's far fewer people, and it's much closer if you want to go and get something from the room. You don't have to walk 10 miles. I would suggest that actually it is as good as some of the newer ships, and all the marketing obviously is designed to get people onto the newer ships and paying a premium. But I'm not swayed by the marketing, and I'm like, is there a pool? Is there a water slide? Is there mini golf? Is there a beautiful main dining room? The menus are all the same across the fleet. So I'm just not drawn by that. To me, I'm very price conscious, and especially when you're taking the kids. So I do argue that for what you actually use, there's no reason to be on a 250,000 gross ton ship when you can be on a 150,000 gross ton ship and have just as much fun.
There are so many factors that go into deciding about which ship to choose and which ship to book. And I think you're right. Like, if you look at the advertising for Icon class and then you go back and look at the Oasis class, obviously there's just so much to talk about. There's so many things to amuse and distract. But, bits of that are visible on the previous members of the fleet. We went on, years ago now, but we went on the Enchantment of the Seas. And it had just, at that time, it had also just been refurbished. Years back it had been lengthened, so it's the biggest of the Vision class ships. But it's definitely like a smaller ship compared to 83,000 gross tons, I think it is. And they just implemented a more robust activity program. So there was a bungee trampoline, there was the new rock climbing wall. They had sort of other adrenaline type activities on the top of the ship. But for the most part, people were just chilling out around the pool.
Right.
And having some drinks and listening to the music and getting involved in the atrium's very well activated there, and they have all sorts of activities and art auctions and all sorts of things. But it's not just like lot number 33. It's fun. They make it a bit over the top, and most people were just involved in that. There was obviously people who wanted to do the more robust activities, but the majority of people were on the ship for that just relaxation time more than anything else, and just to sort of chill. So I think there's always a good proportion of people who will book it maybe because it looks exciting, but spend most of their time doing traditional cruise stuff.
Yeah, I think that's the point that I was trying to make. And it also means that if you're like me and you're budget conscious, then you can go on more cruises in the year than just throwing all your money at one of the biggest and newest ships. And it's important also, if you do live near a port, to try and take cruises from your port. Don't fly unless it's absolutely necessary. Because in my experience, the difference in going on a cruise that you need to fly to and one that you can just drive to is massive. You sometimes you need another vacation when you come back from a cruise where you've had to do the airport thing, because airports these days are a lot of work for people, really hard work, especially when you've got kids. And so, if you are able to drive to a port, I think that is a gift. It really is. And if you're a cruiseaholic, then move to Miami, or move to Florida, or, if you're in the UK, move to near Southampton. I think that it's important to do these things, to prioritize your downtime. But like I say, it's what I love about cruising is that I can talk about the minutiae and get really down on details, bulkheads and everything. I love the detail. But I also occasionally like to step back and be like, just get me on a cruise. It doesn't really matter. So I'm a bit of a contradiction, really. My views on cruising are a bit of a contradiction. But I just love the sense of occasion, dressing up for the main dining room. Not that my kids will, my daughter will, but my son won't wear anything other than his sweats and his T-shirts, even in the evening. Yeah. But it's still nice for them to want to go to the fancy dining room, and it's so cute watching kids like ordering off a big menu and talking to the server. And my daughter, the first time she ordered steak, and they cut it up for her, and it was just lovely. Like, I was just thrilled watching that moment. And it's an opportunity to teach them good table manners and which silverware to use in which order and stuff. There are lots of educational and cultural things that you can learn at sea with the family.
And what I find on the ships is that the crew, many of whom are away for 9 months and missing their own children, really love seeing
that is so interesting. Yeah, that is very well observed and very important too. It is so hard to be. And I'm amazed when I talk to the crew how many of them have got kids. Because you'd think, if you've got kids, I couldn't imagine taking a job where I would be away from my kids.
And working 7 days a week, Anthony.
That's right.
It's not like you're getting days off. Yeah. No, it's pretty intense.
I wanted to ask you, when you're traveling, how much of your time on the cruise do you spend in your cabin? Because this is something that I think is very interesting also. And I'm just guessing here that if you have an inside cabin, do you think one is more likely to spend less time in an inside cabin and then take advantage of the ship more and be up on deck more and sitting in a deck chair up on deck? Whereas if you have a balcony cabin, there's a good chance you're going to spend a little bit more time in your cabin. Do you think that rings true?
I'd say so. I have most of my experience, as I mentioned before, is traveling in non-balcony cabins. So I've had, trips with balcony cabins before, and particularly if it's, a media-hosted trip. So a cruise line might invite members of the press or YouTubers to experience a new ship or a ship that's coming for the first time. Generally, they'll put you up very kindly in a balcony cabin because they obviously want to put the ship's best foot forward. But when I'm working on board as a guest speaker, it's not a balcony cabin. And when we travel as a family, it's generally not a balcony cabin as well. So, and we don't use the cabin very much. Like, it's basically your spot to go and maybe have a few moments to reset between events. It's a place to get changed. It's a place to sleep, all those sorts of things. But if I'm traveling with my best mate Luke, you're never in the cabin really at all because he's just go the whole time, which is great fun. We're just like out there and exploring the ship. If I'm traveling by myself, which I've say for example on the Queen Anne's maiden voyage, I was just there by myself. Lots of friends on the ship, but between things, I'd go back to the ocean view room that I had and just sort of calm down between different events because it's a lot of we like to take a lot of naps. My wife and I, especially when you're trying not to use the elevators, and so you're doing quite a lot of walking, and because you're eating a lot, that's exhausting. And so we're like, should we have a little nap? And we go and we like to have a little lie down for
sometimes 2 or 3 hours. So I say to her, come on, let's go make more use of the ship, because otherwise we've come on vacation just to do what we can do at home, which is just, be horizontal. So I think sometimes for us, there's like a little pressure to not waste the vacation. But, we both work hard, and I think getting away is a nice opportunity just to pass out sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, on the transatlantic crossing that I did back in 2019, my brother-in-law, Alex, actually came with me on that, because he was also wanting to experience that remarkable transatlantic passage. And, it's a 7-day crossing, but I think it was on night 6. We just decided, look, we just can't be bothered with anything, any more socializing for this particular day. So we just did the room service in the cabin. He had his iPad or something and was able to stream it to the television. We watched a movie, got burgers delivered, and it's like, you know what? How good is this? Like, you've got your little cocoon where you can go and just have your own private space, but then if you want to, there's a whole city upstairs you can go and check out.
Well, maybe you've just put your finger on the kind of crux of this, and that is choice. It's I guess people that don't do cruises, they maybe see the advertising and they're like, oh, I wouldn't want to do all that. And the thing about being a cruise passenger is that you get to choose, and they offer you all of these activities, and you don't have to do any of them. They're included in your cruise fare, but you don't have to join in with any of it. And if you want to stay in the cabin and get room service, that is entirely down to you. And I guess maybe that's what I like about it, is the kind of lack of rules. It's like choose your own adventure books.
Yeah.
You can really, and every day can be a different cruising experience. I thought it was interesting what you were saying earlier about, the itineraries and stuff, because invariably we don't get off the ship. I don't know if that's a bad thing, but we certainly, when I go with the kids on vacation, we don't get off the ship. When the ship goes to Mexico and stuff, we don't get off the ship. We stay on board, and we love the ship being more quiet because a lot of people are off on excursions. And on the occasions that we do get off the ship, we just get off for an hour or an hour and a half or something, because we want to get back on the ship. So it really is, again, it's choose your own adventure, because we traveled with people recently to Alaska on the Celebrity Edge, and they had all these excursions booked. They had all this stuff that they were going to do. And they had a great time, and the excursions were great. But did they have a better time than us? I don't think so. We probably had as good a time as each other. And I guess the other thing with me is that because I like to set the price before we go, neither of us drink particularly, so we're not going to get a drinks package, which some people pay more for their drinks package than I pay for the whole cruise. Because I set this rule of £100 or $130 a day for the cruise, and I won't pay more than that. Like, there has never been an occasion where I've paid more than that. But some people are paying $130 a day for a drinks package. I just can't imagine it. So part of the joy of cruising for me is getting a nil sum bill apart from the gratuities at the end of the trip. And for other people, it's not like that. They're so fast and free with their spending, and I actually enjoy taking advantage of everything that's included. And the other tip that I think we mentioned once before, after my experience of doing the upgrade to the Celebrity Retreat, which I didn't really recommend, was
that episode still gets lots and lots of feedback. Actually,
it's a controversial episode, isn't it?
Well, here's it. The longer it's out now, the more people who are, I guess, wanting to interact with it and disagree with you, Anthony. You're getting quite a lot of
I love that, and bring it on. I'm not here for an argument, just here for fun.
No.
And I love that the people that like the retreat it's just a different mindset.
Yeah.
And to me,
that's the way, though, isn't it?
The way that we cruise, we just don't need that level of segregation. We can do that ourselves in our regular cabins, and we don't need butlers and that kind of thing. But the tip I was going to give is that some of these specialty restaurants are really good and they're really quite inexpensive. And so the people that say that they want to do the ship within a ship because they want an elevated food experience, you're much better off like getting an inside cabin, paying as little as possible, booking it during a sale, doing what I do. If you're in the US, you can call them up and say, the price has dropped, can you adjust my booking? And they'll do that, quite happy to do that. But then pay for 2 or 3 nights of specialty dining and for actually not much more money, $40 a head maybe for each meal, sometimes less, sometimes a little more. You can actually have that elevated experience in very fine dining spaces and feel like you're a suite passenger without having to fork out what is often 2 or 3 or 4 times more money to be in the retreat or the haven or, the equivalent of any of these ships within the ship.
Yeah, I guess the funny thing this is the thing with cruising, right, is because there's everything from the suite or the grand suite or the presidential suite all the way down to like an inside cabin, it attracts such a large snapshot of society with so many different approaches to what, good value really is. And an interesting little thought experiment, I suppose, in terms of like how much people must love being at sea, is that if you were to go to a resort that had pools and shows and activities and shops and all that sort of stuff, think of a Fijian resort or in Bali or something like that on the Cancun, and you went into your room and it was a small 200 square foot inside room with no window and a bathroom that, if you turn around, you're knocking yourself out in, you really wouldn't think that was okay. And yet, on a cruise ship, for some reason, that's forgiven because of something more that it's bringing to you than the land-based experience. And I think that does link it back to what we were saying before about that allure of being at sea, and that the cruise ship itself, I don't know if it's so much anymore, but particularly when I first started traveling, it became its own world where it had its own atmosphere, its own culture. It detached from land, less and less now, obviously, because of technology. But it really did feel like you were going to a special place that couldn't be found anywhere else. And although we've had some amazing land-based holidays, the atmosphere on the cruise ship was distinct from those, which is I think something that makes it special. And I don't know how many people are traveling now because of that, or how many people travel now and that's a nostalgic memory that they're trying to recreate. Be fascinating to find out if anyone else feels this way. But I think that was part of it, particularly in the growth of cruising. And up until maybe the 2000s, like people just like to be away from the everyday. I remember Cunard's advertising back then with QE2, Sagafjord, Vistafjord, Royal Viking Sun, and they'd always say, escape the hustle and bustle of modern life. And you could do that because literally as soon as the ship pulled away from port, the mobile reception disappeared, and that was that.
Well, that's what I was saying about driving to the ship, is that your vacation starts the moment you board. And if you are lucky enough to, and I see this on a lot of the vlogs of people who live in Florida, and they go and they park up in the multi-story parking lot, and they literally either take a little shuttle or they walk across the street to the ship. You got that drive, which is the excitement and the build-up, and then the little walk, and then crossing the gangway, and hopefully a quick check-in, and your vacation has started. And the first thing you do when you get on board is you try and get on as early as possible so that you can eat. You don't want to miss a meal. And in fact, our last trip with the kids just a couple of months ago on the Navigator of the Seas, we managed to get a 10:30 a.m. check-in. And we got to the port really early, and we literally got on board at like 10:33, and nothing was open. Like none of the restaurants were open. They were still doing the changeover, from the previous cruise. And so it made me realize that actually getting on that early might be a mistake. The rooms weren't ready until 1 o'clock, but we waited. I think the buffet opened in the end at around 11, so that was fine. We were able to pile in there and have some fun. But I do think that your day revolves around the meals And I like to have dinner at 7 o'clock on land, but at sea I like to have dinner at 8 o'clock and a bit later because I've got like 5 meals before dinner that I have to stagger. You know what I mean? So it's just a very different experience. We don't live like that at home.
No, I think I'm in the minority, definitely in the minority, because like to be fair, food is the last thing I'm thinking about on embarkation day. Like I'm just doing it the way I used to do it when I was younger, and that you get on board the ship. The first thing, even though I've been on the ship 1,000 times before, the first thing I want to do is just like walk the ship, just go around, familiarize myself with the ship, see all the different spaces on board again. And I know it sounds like maybe a little bit strange, but because particularly if you're traveling on like brands that you know the people on board, you'll see all the people you know, the crew that you know from previous trips, and you can go and say hi, and like it just feels like you're resituating yourself. And then maybe like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I realize,
you see, you and I
haven't
so
had anything
different.
to eat.
I won't, because invariably, if you're driving to the ship, a couple of hours and you've not had a meal, so of course, but getting the value, because they're going to kick you off at breakfast on the last day. Yeah. And the people that skip breakfast on the last day, I'm like, what are you doing? Like that's like a whole meal. So I always try to take breakfast in the main dining room on the last day. The buffet can sometimes get a bit crazy. And maybe it's worth mentioning, and we talked about boarding and getting on. And then another tip certainly for Royal Caribbean celebrity travelers is that you can actually you check in from like 21 days out. And it's not a full check-in though. It's just like choosing your arrival time and filling in some of your personal details and checking a few boxes. But actually, you can go into that on the app and just select your arrival time at midnight 21 days before. You don't have to fill in anything else. You can just select your arrival time. And if you do it just before the clock strikes 12, or as the clock strikes 12, you can get that 10 or 10:30 a.m. arrival time. If you wait to do it, you'll end up with a 2 p.m. or a 3 p.m. before the ship leaves at 4. So these are the tips to squeeze in an extra meal. And then the converse kind of argument is that at the end of the cruise, people are desperate to get off for some reason. I don't know why. I like to stay on till I'm the very last man standing.
I want to just pick on that point for a second because as much as I enjoy cruising, one of my absolute least favorite aspects of cruising is the disembarkation experience and the last day. Yeah, I have never. I mean, I hear Virgin Voyages does it differently. They do it more like a hotel where it's later in the day. Yeah, but I've never experienced a cruise line or a ship that can do a good disembarkation because you literally, as you say, and I know it's because of turnover, and I know because they're crews overworked and all that sort of stuff, but they kick you out your cabin at 8 o'clock in the morning. You've got luggage with you that you obviously couldn't put out because you just got to have day clothes. Then there's like everybody roaming the ship trying to get food, but all the other services, the entertainment services, they're all closed. All so closed, there's nothing to do except go to the dining room. And then there's the staggered process where everyone's sort of just sitting in a lounge looking like with that look of horror that you get at the airport terminal when you're waiting for the flight to board. Yeah. And I just wish they would use all this innovation that they've got around squeezing all the money out of the passengers and that sort of thing, and just like think, can we rework this? Because you know what, if you had a disembarkation process that was taking place, but for people who are leaving the ship later, there was an activity, there was something else to do, you would clear out that.
But I find that if you do the self-disembarkation, and if you don't leave your cases out by 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. as the ships require, for them to take them, put them in the terminal. If you do a self-disembarkation, that means packing a little smarter. So thinking about the luggage that you're taking, and don't take because it's like unlimited luggage, people sometimes are inclined to bring too much. Yeah. And that is one of the luxuries of going on a ship as opposed to traveling on a plane. But actually you're better off packing less. And if you're on a line like P&O or Cunard that have laundrettes on board, then I actually quite like to use the laundrette and the laundromat and wash clothes as opposed to bring too much. But
the challenge with Cunard is you got to bring the suit. So it fills up more, and the formal wear,
Several suits, that's right.
Yeah,
but I find that doing self-disembarkation and not getting out the room till the very last minute, I'm always like the last passenger to leave. I don't leave later than they require us, but I'm always out at exactly 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. depending on what they require. And then, to the buffet. So I leave the cases in the room, go get breakfast, come back, get the cases, and then I'm last off. And I've never had a problem with disembarkation. It's always been a breeze. There's never a line because of our little system that we have. But, packing the night before and putting your clothes out and thinking about leaving some clean undercrackers in your purse for the next morning, I mean, I can't be doing with all that.
Yeah. To be fair, I actually do self-disembarkation pretty much every time now.
Yeah.
And I have an advantage that when I'm working on board, they allow me to put my bags in the cruise director's office.
Oh, that's great.
Little thing that they do for the entertainers, because obviously when we're flying back to Australia from somewhere in Asia or Europe or whatever, we might not leave the ship until the very, very end, because what else are you going to do until you get to the airport? And they've got transfers and that sort of thing that they can organise for entertainers as well. But I feel for like a lot of the other passengers on disembarkation day, when they are doing, they have got lots of bags, they are doing that sort of thing. The ship is quite crowded, and I just feel like that's one of those things that they could enhance by activate. We actually saw it done very well in P&O Australia on one particular voyage back when it was still operating. And funnily enough, I was the entertainment. The ship was arriving late, and then in Melbourne, the Princess Cruises ship that was there was in the space in the terminal that we needed. So they actually started doing sort of laps, but everyone was already like out of their cabin because they didn't realize this was happening. And they actually contacted me as one of the guest speakers and said, "Can you come and do your extra talk in the theatre?" So everyone crowded into the theatre, and we're literally pulling in against the pier. I could see out the windows of the top level of the theatre, the Grand Princess as we're pulling in next to her, whilst I'm giving the presentation, just to keep people entertained. And that was good, because no one's wandering around feeling lost, carrying their cases. They just left them at the entrance and came in and enjoyed the show. And I thought that was a very good idea.
Yeah, if you've already got a lecturer on board and people are going to be a little bit kind of at a loose end, then educate them and entertain them.
Absolutely.
Why not? Yeah. We have to finish, unfortunately.
We do.
It is that time. But, now we've been talking about this. I literally can't wait to get on another cruise, and I don't have one booked for 23 days. So I'm going to have to wait 23 days for the next one.
I wouldn't be surprised if you message me tomorrow and say I've booked a cruise. That happens quite regularly.
Yeah. Well, here's a final tip just regarding, not overpaying, is that sometimes it's good to choose the cruise that you'd like to go on. Don't book it, but put it in your calendar anyway. And so that that cruise is there. And then set yourself up with like the cruise line or any of these apps that send you alerts as the price, the volatile pricing changes. And when it hits your target, that's when you book it. And sometimes it's not until 2 weeks or a week before the sailing, and the price will drop significantly. But if it's in your calendar, I'm a bit like that with Amazon sometimes. I like to put stuff in my basket, but I never check out, but I kind of feel like I've got it. And I think it's the same with the cruise. Be aware that the pricing is volatile, and to take advantage of it, if you're not so fussed about choice of cabin in terms of location, then just save it for the sail.
Makes sense. Before we go, can I just do a little selfless plug for my new Substack? Because we've had so many wonderful people commenting on the historic episodes we did, particularly about the evolution of transatlantic crossing and Queen Mary 2, and then of course our Queen Mary episode, which has just been so well received from 2 episodes back. And you've been encouraging me for quite a while to consider writing on Substack. So I launched that about 9-10 days ago. There's 8 articles up there so far, and it's all maritime history focused. So it's at themaritime.historian.substack.com. or you can just Google the Maritime Historian Substack and you'll find it. And I would love it if people were liking to come across and have a read and subscribe if they're interested.
Wonderful. Well, I'm a subscriber and a big fan. So congratulations on the maiden voyage of your Substack and the launch of that project. And we'll come back next week with another Expert Cruise Show. And follow us on Instagram, The Expert Cruise Show. Chris's Substack, of course, and don't forget to share the show and comment down below as well. And we'll see you for another episode next week.